Transform rejection into desire with inverse psychology rejection as a mirror. What if rejection wasn't the end, but the beginning of becoming whole? In this powerful psychological exploration, we go beyond the surface pain of being rejected to uncover its deeper truth. Rejection is a mirror, not a verdict drawing from Carl Jung's shadow work. We reveal how rejection awakens parts of you long buried your fears, unmet needs, and forgotten wounds instead of trying to erase rejection. We ask you to face it and discover the self that's been waiting behind the pain. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about understanding why rejection hurts and how it can free you. You'll learn why real attraction doesn't come from being chosen, but from choosing yourself first. Because only when you stop seeking approval can you start living with integrity. If you've ever felt broken by rejection, this is your invitation to see it as a doorway home. Rejection doesn't break you, it awakens you. There are certain pains no one wants to talk about, yet they silently shape your entire being. Rejection is one of them. It makes your heart ache, your self-worth crack, and your trust tremble. But if you're brave enough to look again, you'll see that rejection isn't the fatal blow you once believed it to be. It's a wake-up call. Rejection forces you to confront yourself. It makes you ask, what was I expecting? What am I avoiding within me? It's not a feeling of defeat. It's a jolt out of the illusion that you must be liked in order to feel valuable. When you stop running from the pain of being rejected, you begin to see something clearly. It's not here to destroy you, but to call you inward. It gives you a chance to see the vulnerable part of you that's been hidden, the part that's been waiting to be healed. And that is the first step toward freedom, when you no longer allow someone else's no to define your worth. Rejection is not an ending, it's a beginning in disguise. Rejection doesn't come from others. It comes from the part of you you haven't faced. We often think that when someone rejects us, the problem lies with them. They don't understand me, don't value me, don't see my worth. But look deeper, and you'll see that rejection says little about the other person. It's a mirror, reflecting the part of you that you are still denying. Maybe it's your fear of abandonment, your insecurity around self-worth, or the feeling of not being good enough that you've carried for years when someone says no. What gets triggered isn't the present. It's an old wound that's never been healed. You don't hurt because they rejected you. You hurt because you are rejecting a part of yourself. Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Rejection is not an attack. It's a chance to face the shadow you've forgotten. It's the part of you that needs to be acknowledged, accepted, and integrated, not avoided. Ultimately, rejection isn't an external event. It's an internal process, a place where you begin to realize that what hurts you most is something you've never dared to face within. And only when you have the courage to go there can the pain truly start to transform. The more you need to be accepted, the more likely you are to be rejected. There's a strange paradox in human psychology. The more you crave validation, the more likely you are to be rejected. The more you strive to be loved, the more you try to prove your worth, the more you lose what makes you most attractive: self-possession. When you constantly seek approval to feel valuable, you're handing over your sense of worth to others. And the human mind has a clear mechanism. It senses lack when you need. You emit a signal of emotional instability, and that very neediness makes others unconsciously withdraw, no matter how kind or genuine you are. If you give off the signal, I need you to feel whole, the other person will feel pressured. Neediness makes you fragile, vulnerable, and sadly, often repels the very connection you long for. This doesn't mean you're wrong for wanting to be loved, but when that desire turns into dependency, it causes you to lose your center. People are drawn to wholeness, not because you're perfect, but because you don't need to prove anything. And that is rejection's quiet lesson. It reminds you to return to yourself, to rebuild your worth from the inside, so that you walk into the world not with open hands, waiting to be filled, but with a heart that's already full. Stop seeking validation, and you'll begin to shine. Since childhood, we've been taught to live for praise, a look of approval, a word of recognition. Over time, these became the fuel for our sense of existence. But as you grow up relying on external affirmation, You lose touch with what is real value and what is just social performance. You try to become the version of yourself others want, believing that will make them love you more. But the more you do that, the further you drift from who you really are. You no longer shine as yourself. You just reflect a false light, bouncing off the expectations of others. Ironically, the more you try to please everyone, the less magnetic you become, because true attraction doesn't come from trying. It comes from ease, when you no longer need to be seen in order to know you exist. And when you stop seeking attention, stop waiting for praise, something strange happens. You start to shine in your own way quietly, effortlessly, just the full presence of a person who no longer needs validation to feel worthy. And that kind of freedom from the need for approval is what makes you so mysteriously attractive. Because at that point, you're not living to be chosen anymore. You're living as if you chose yourself long ago. The shadow doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be integrated deep within each person, lives a part we'd rather not admit. Envy. Pain. Shameful memories. This is the shadow, the concept Carl Jung spoke of. We bury it, cover it with masks of morality, success, or joy. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It hides and waits for the moment you're weakest to rise up. The biggest mistake is believing we need to eliminate the shadow to become better. But darkness isn't evil, it's what's been abandoned. It holds our truest emotions, our unmet needs, and as long as you refuse to look at it, the shadow will keep controlling you from the background. Individuation, the process Jung emphasized, is not a journey of becoming someone better. It's the return to wholeness. You don't need to defeat your dark side. You need to sit with it, listen to it, and ask, what are you trying to tell me? When you start integrating the shadow, you stop performing, you become more real and stronger. True self-mastery doesn't come from suppressing your darkness, but from holding it within the light of awareness. So don't try to erase the shadow. Step into it, carry light with you, and let it become part of who you are, a part that no longer needs to be feared. You've betrayed yourself before, just to be liked. We've all done this without even realizing it, trading our truth for someone else's approval. There were times you stayed silent when you should have spoken up, times you said yes while your heart screamed no. And worst of all, times you pretended to be someone else, just to avoid being left behind. Rejection can hurt, but self-betrayal is what quietly drains you. Every time you deny your true feelings, every time you say yes when you mean no, you're sending yourself a message: I'm not good enough to be who I truly am. You may have changed yourself to fit in, believing that would earn more love, but eventually you realized, even when you tried your hardest to please, you were still rejected, not because you weren't good enough, but because you weren't being real. Even the most subtle form of inauthenticity creates invisible distance. True love doesn't require you to abandon your essence. The right people will recognize you in both your light and your darkness, but you won't find that connection if you're still hiding from yourself. Rejection from others may sting for a moment, but rejecting yourself, no matter how gently or unconsciously, creates a pain that lingers. So start by being honest with yourself, even if that honesty makes you less likable in someone's eyes. At the very least, you'll no longer be a stranger to yourself. Real magnetism doesn't come from being chosen, but from choosing yourself. You once believed that your attractiveness came from others seeing value in you, that when someone loved you, praised you, or chose you, it meant you were special. But then you discovered there were moments you were chosen, and still felt empty times you were loved, and still didn't feel lovable. That's because you had never chosen yourself. True magnetism doesn't begin on the outside. It begins the moment you stop begging for attention. Stop stretching yourself to fit someone else's mold. When you look at yourself, flaws, wounds, shadows, and light, and still say, I choose to stay with myself, something begins to shift. People are not drawn to perfection. They're drawn to wholeness. And wholeness doesn't mean being flawless. It means not abandoning yourself for someone else's approval. When you choose yourself, you no longer perform, and the world can feel that. Strangely, the moment you stop needing to be chosen is when you become most magnetic, because you radiate something rare, the energy of someone who knows who they are and doesn't need anyone to define it for them. True attraction comes from inner integrity, not from outer validation. And only when you choose yourself can others truly see you, not a polished version, but the real, vibrant, full you. And that is irresistible. Rejection is a mirror of what hasn't been healed yet every time you're rejected. Something inside you stings, not just because the moment hurts, but because it awakens an older pain, a familiar ache you never fully understood. Rejection isn't just an event, it's a door to something you're still hiding. You might think the rejection happened because the other person was careless, the timing was wrong, or you weren't good enough. But the real reason it hurts lies not in the act itself, but in what it touches inside you. Maybe it's a childhood memory of being left out, a hidden shame you've never spoken aloud, a moment when someone turned their back on you and you didn't know why. Rejection is a mirror. It doesn't lie. It reflects exactly what in you is still in need of healing. Every rejection is an opportunity not to change yourself for someone else, but to turn inward and ask, why does this hurt so much? Carl Jung once said, you don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And rejection is one of the most powerful keys to bring your shadow to the surface. Don't run from it. Observe it. Let your emotions guide you back to the wound's origin. Because only when you face your own truth can you heal, not by erasing the pain, but by finally listening to what it's been trying to tell you all along. Every repeating pattern in life is a call from the forgotten unconscious. Have you ever wondered why you keep falling into the same situations, the same types of relationships with the same kind of hurt, the same disappointments, just in new disguises, the same loneliness, abandonment, invisibility coming back again, even when you thought you'd outgrown it? It's not a coincidence, it's your unconscious trying to speak. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The patterns in your life are not some cruel destiny. They're reminders, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, that there's still something you haven't faced. Maybe you keep choosing people who can't love you fully. Maybe you ignore your feelings to keep the peace. Maybe you stay in draining jobs you can't quit. These are not random choices. They are symptoms of what's buried deep. Distorted beliefs, repressed memories, unnamed fears. Rejection, when it repeats, is more than an event. It becomes a symbol, a wake-up call, an invitation to go inward and face something you've long avoided within yourself. You don't need to keep running, because what you run from will keep repeating until you stop, listen, and accept every pattern is not a punishment. It's an opportunity, a chance to step out of the unconscious loop and begin living a life shaped by awareness. When you no longer need, you become truly magnetic. There's a profound paradox in life. The less you need validation, the more naturally attractive you become. When you stop seeking approval, you become free. And that freedom emits a rare energy, the energy of someone who knows their worth and doesn't need others to confirm it. What draws people to you, not perfection, not even pleasantness, but inner state, the energy of someone who is no longer ruled by the hunger to be loved. When you stop chasing attention, attention finds you. When you stop needing to be seen, you start being noticed. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. On the contrary, you become more alive because you're finally being true to yourself. You're no longer a version eroded by trying to please everyone. And that's what makes you different. Your full presence, unapproved, unfiltered, and unapologetic. You're no longer trying to be loved. You love yourself enough not to betray yourself for it. Rejection no longer breaks you because you no longer place your worth in being accepted. You know your value doesn't come from others, but from the simple truth that you've learned to stand inside yourself. And when your energy says, I don't need, but I'm open to receive, that is the moment you become most magnetic. Because nothing is more irresistible than a soul that stopped begging and started choosing. What hurts isn't the rejection, it's the inner doubt when someone rejects you. Your first response may be anger, disappointment, or a sense of injustice. But if you're still enough to look deeper, you'll see what truly hurts isn't the other person's no, it's the familiar whisper inside you that says, maybe they're right, maybe you're not good enough, maybe you're unlovable, unworthy, not enough. Rejection doesn't create pain, it exposes the crack that was already there. It doesn't wound you with force, but with resonance, it touches a fear you've carried silently for years. You've heard things like, "You'll never make it. You're not smart enough. You always disappoint people." These voices may no longer be external, but they still echo inside like ghosts. And every time someone turns you down, those ghosts awaken, pulling you back into self-doubt. Healing doesn't begin with finding someone to validate you. It begins with realizing that the pain isn't about them. It's about the belief you've unconsciously carried for years. When you face that inner doubt, when you ask yourself, "Who told me I wasn't enough, and why did I believe them?" you begin to reclaim your power. You're no longer a victim of rejection. You become the one who heals yourself with faith, with truth, and with the gentleness you once waited for from others. Society teaches you to wear masks and calls it success from a young age. You were taught to be good, to be loved, to be excellent, to be praised, to be like others, to avoid ridicule gradually. You learned to wear masks. The mask of someone who's always fine, the mask of success, the mask of being lovable, desirable, chosen. Society doesn't tell you to be real, it tells you to be better, different, more like them. So you start living as a performance, smiling when you're not happy, achieving while feeling empty, socializing while feeling alone. You think that if you're polished enough, smart enough, just right, then you'll finally be loved. But deep down, you're tired. No one can perform forever. And the painful truth is, you're often rejected not because you weren't perfect, but because others couldn't connect with the real you, the one buried beneath too many layers. True success doesn't come from applause. It comes from the moment you take off the mask and still stand in front of the mirror unashamed, unpretending. Because in that moment, you're no longer living to be accepted. You're living to be authentic. And that is the rarest freedom in this world. Rejection is not a tragedy. It's an invitation to transform. We often equate rejection with failure, with loss, with something to be avoided at all costs. But the truth is, rejection isn't an ending. It's a catalyst for your deepest transformation. When you're rejected, you have two choices. One, retreat. Build thicker walls. Become guarded and afraid too. Ask a braver question. What is this trying to teach me? In that moment, you shift from reaction to awareness. Rejection only hurts when you're clinging to something that isn't real. A role, an image, a false expectation. When those illusions are shattered, you're given the chance to return to something more honest, more you. And that's when you stop pretending. That's when you begin to live in truth. Even if at first it's uncomfortable, transformation doesn't happen when everything's easy. It happens in the crashes, in the losses, in the moments you're pushed out of your comfort zone. Rejection doesn't come to punish you. It comes to remind you it's time to change, not to become someone else, but to return to who you really are. And in that process, you're not losing anything, you're just shedding what was never truly yours. Deep relationships aren't born from need, they're born from inner wholeness. You might have believed that deep relationships come from making someone feel like they need you. The closeness comes from mutual lack. But that's an illusion. What you truly need is not someone to fill a void, but a connection rooted in the wholeness of two souls. When you enter a relationship from a place of inner emptiness, you fall into patterns of control, dependence, or fear of loss. You're not truly loving, you're looking for someone to soothe an old wound, and that will never create real intimacy. Deep relationships form when two people meet not to get love, but to share the love already inside them. When you know who you are, when you don't need to be rescued, when you can stand strong on your own, then you can love without clinging. Love isn't the merging of two fears. It's the meeting of two beings who've walked through their own darkness and choose to stay not from need, but from respect. It's a relationship born, not from grasping, but from freedom. And only when you're whole within yourself can you create a space safe enough for love to truly grow. What if you no longer needed anyone's approval? How would you live? Imagine this, starting tomorrow. You no longer crave approval, no more hunger for love, praise, or agreement. How would you live? This isn't a theoretical question. It's a mirror for your life. Because most of the time we don't act for ourselves, we act for how we'll be seen. We choose careers, relationships, even dreams based on what society expects. But if you stripped all that away, what would remain? When you no longer need to be accepted, you begin to live truthfully. You say no when it matters. You change direction when your intuition whispers. You let go of what no longer fits, even if no one understands. You stop living to be chosen. You live as though you chose yourself from the beginning. And in that moment, you touch a rare kind of freedom, inner freedom. It doesn't come from money or achievement, but from peace, the peace of knowing you don't need to be anyone else to be enough. You're no longer wounded by external no's because you've learned to say yes to yourself. And that's not selfishness. It's the foundation of a life that's real independent, unregretful, not built to be loved, but to be true. Rejection is not the end. It's a door back to yourself every time you face rejection. It often feels like the end of a chance, a relationship, a belief you once held dear. But if you pause and truly look into that pain, you'll realize it doesn't close anything. It opens something far more important, a doorway leading back to you. Rejection forces you to ask, who am I when I'm no longer liked? What remains when I'm not accepted? And from there, you begin a journey of no longer needing others' approval to feel worthy. Behind rejection is a space where honesty can finally breathe. It takes away what you thought you needed and reveals the truth. You are still you, even when no one chooses you. And sometimes, that's the first step toward real maturity. You don't need anyone's validation to know you're enough. You don't need an invitation from the outside world to start living from your truth. Rejection is simply a signal that it's time to choose yourself again. It's no longer the enemy. It's a door. And the only one who can walk through that door is you, not to become a better version, but to return home to yourself whole, grounded, honest, and free. The fear of rejection, the root of social pretending deep inside everyone lives, a quiet but powerful fear. The fear of being excluded from the group, it's a survival instinct rooted in ancient times, when being cast out from the tribe meant death, and even today. Though we live in modern cities, our minds still carry that primal imprint. That fear teaches us to fit in at all costs. We change the way we speak, dress, express ourselves, just to avoid being the odd one out. We pretend we're fine when we're hurting. We agree when we actually disagree. We conform to standards we don't truly believe in. We call it maturity, wisdom, but sometimes it's just a subtle abandonment of ourselves. Modern society praises individuality, but punishes too much difference. You're told to be yourself as long as yourself still fits safely within the group's comfort zone. So you live with a quiet worry, if I show who I really am, will I still be loved? Rejection. Then isn't just personal, it's a social tool, a way to preserve order, reminding people where the edges of acceptable authenticity lie. But if you live only to avoid being excluded, you're merely surviving, not truly living. The more you fear exclusion, the more you conform, and the further you drift from the unique self you were born to be. Yet here's the irony, the moment you dare to stand apart, to be real, to walk alone, you become more magnetic than ever. Because in a world of masks, a genuine soul is rare, and rare is always valuable. Common misconceptions about psychology and the truth we must see in the journey of healing and self-understanding. Many turn to psychology as a lifeline, but they often carry misconceptions that throw the process off course. The more we believe in these myths, the more we feel lost when healing doesn't go as planned. The first misconception, healing means never feeling pain again. The truth is, healing doesn't erase negative emotions. It simply teaches you how to stay present with pain, without drowning in it, how to listen rather than resist, how to accept instead of deny. Second, many believe that the shadow, the dark side of the psyche, is something evil that must be eliminated. But Carl Jung made it clear, the shadow isn't your enemy. It's the unseen, rejected part of you, the part that didn't fit into society's idea of goodness. Inside the shadow lives creativity, survival instincts, and deep strength you've never tapped into. Third, some think psychology is dry theory, only for troubled people, but the truth is, psychology is a map of the inner world. a tool to know yourself more deeply, not because something is wrong with you, but because you are human. Lastly, a dangerous myth: people who understand psychology don't get hurt in reality. The more self-aware you are, the more sensitive you become, but you also know how to stand up, observe, and transform pain into insight. Psychology doesn't promise you'll always be fine. It only shows you this: you don't have to be fine to live a deep, meaningful, and liberated life. The truth isn't always pleasant, but only truth can heal, not by denying pain, but by looking straight at it through the light of awareness. You don't need to be healed to be loved. You need to be understood to be yourself. We often believe that only when we're healed enough, strong enough, perfect enough, we'll finally be worthy of love. But that's a gentle and dangerous illusion, because it makes us postpone love for ourselves, saying, "I'm not ready yet, I need to fix myself first." The truth is, you don't need to be okay to be loved, because real love doesn't wait for you to patch up your broken parts. It arrives when you step out with your wounds still raw and still choose to live honestly, without hiding, pretending, or performing. Healing isn't about earning acceptance from others. It's about stopping your own rejection of yourself. When you understand yourself, you no longer try to become someone else just to please the world. You start living as who you are, regardless of whether anyone gets it. And that's when you become most lovable, not because you're flawless, but because you're willing to be real, not because you're pain-free, but because you've learned to embrace your pain with the same tenderness you once longed to receive from others. You don't need to be healed to be loved. You need to be understood so you can stop abandoning yourself. Rejection is not life denying you, it's life inviting you back to yourself in the end. You'll realize rejection didn't come to shrink you. It came to show you what acceptance never could: who you are when no one's holding you. No one's choosing you. And in that hollow silence, you discover a strength you never knew, a strength that no longer waits for validation, but begins walking with a light that comes from within. Rejection, if you face it with courage, won't break you. It will strip away everything you once wore to be loved. And when it all falls away, what remains is simply you, whole, unproven, and unapologetically alive. Life was never trying to reject you. It was patiently waiting for you to stop rejecting yourself. And when you return honestly, wholly, the world no longer needs to accept you, because you already have.